Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Noxcast, your Equinox News Recap podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Hope. I'm the managing executive editor of the Equinox.
I'm Chloe Erno, the news editor.
It's been quite a while since I've been able to say those words. It's been around 5 weeks of winter break, and I think a well-deserved break for everyone around campus, not just us here at the Equinox, but for all students. Unlike other news publications where, it's a year-round thing, including on holidays themselves, fortunately, we get to have a little bit of a break, rest and reset. But, we're hitting the ground running, back with the news again. Over the winter break, I took part in some activities separate from the Equinox, but relating to KSC, that I did want to briefly bring up, which is part of this community group that has the goal of supporting the college and preserving its liberal arts identity. And so we had some virtual meetings within the group, but then also a meeting in early January, which the Keene Sentinel reported on, where we heard from KC administrators as well as USNH leadership about the financial status of the college. So we heard a lot about sort of what had been working on behind the scenes, because, even though, students all take the winter break all to relax for themselves, things do still go on at the college. And so, not just me, but I think all of us definitely pay attention and keep up with the news over break. And so we will have quite a bit to share in this recap with you here. Chloe, I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to talk about.
No, and I think that your work definitely coincides really well with what we've done, especially in the news and the opinion section this last week. But it's very important work, and it's very current in our community and what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, sort of some similar things that were discussed at this early January meeting that I attended were also discussed at an all-campus sort of forum town hall event that was hosted in the Redfern Arts Center's Alumni Recital Hall. And this was meant for mainly faculty and staff, but other community members also attended, which was just a presentation about sort of where administrators feel is the best direction for the college to go in. The main thing that sort of came out of this meeting was the release or the showing of a Venn diagram, which shows Keene State's academic programs broken down into 3 separate schools, quote unquote, different categories. So School of Liberal Arts, School of Applied Sciences, and then one for Professional and Educational Studies. And so the Venn diagram graphic is meant to show that all these areas of study kind of support each other. And, liberal arts is still core to the college's identity, which is something we discussed in a previous editorial. So, there was some mixed reactions from the audience, I think, about this new proposal. It's kind of uncertain whether this proposal is actually purely like a marketing strategy at this point, or if it's more of like a genuine, like, no, the college should be broken down into 3 separate schools with administrative structures. So we also did an editorial on this, but yeah, the article was done by our wonderful staffer, Sam. So shout out to her for, breaking down this very important topic, very important event. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know we discussed it in the editorial, our separate opinions coming to one about this topic, but I think it's just not the wisest idea to try and break down the college into that kind of system. I think that our liberal arts title is very important to us, and it's what defines us as a unique college. It's our identity here. And I think that doing that would take away largely from what defines us as a unique college. And it's really one of the few things that we have going for us here. It's something that people go to Keene for, it's something that gravitates students here. And I just don't think that separating it like that would work out very well in the long run.
I think it kind of, maybe unintentionally pits, different programs against each other in some ways, even though the Venn diagram is meant to show cooperation. I think there was some pushback from faculty members in the audience about, liberal arts programs are the reinforcers, quote unquote, and John Hart from the music department said, we're not just reinforcers, we're, our own distinctive programs, and we should be respected and valued as such. Another thing is sort of how this Venn diagram was presented was, showing how many majors were in each program, how many faculty, and then kind of showing that, oh, well, this school of programs like, applied sciences has more students but less faculty, and liberal arts has more faculty but less students. So the sort of, assumption that's to be made from that is, oh, maybe there should be less liberal arts faculty and more applied sciences. Obviously, that wasn't said at the meeting, but, it could be made the argument that, that kind of is looking to subtly and maybe slowly shift the rhetoric to say, these programs have X amount of students, so then that means they should have X amount of faculty, and then this should be less. So, it's kind of at a crucial time, and I think, what we talked about in the editorial to try to differentiate it from our previous one was, first of all, nothing of this should be like set in stone in terms of the administrative structures. Keene State used to have a 3-school system. It went down to 2 schools and then 1 school, 1 college. This was during former President Treadwell's tenure that, that consolidation happened. It's cost savings because, if you have administrative structures in different schools, then that costs more money. So obviously making a decision like that to reintroduce schools kind of doesn't seem like the best idea. But even from a marketing standpoint, it's also kind of just confusing because, in this case, the audience is faculty and staff at the college who are very familiar with the school's academic programs. And so they will have different thoughts than ultimately the general public and the state legislator. And so we talked a little bit also about the fight with the legislator when it comes to funding and sort of, administrators trying to win over their support even still, despite the fact that it kind of seems like there's little, support among it, at least in the New Hampshire State House, for, reintroducing those funds that will be needed, basically. And so, we kind of made the argument that this should be brought to the general public. It should be, here's who we are as a college, and we should try to make people recognize that importance rather than, you need to know your audience. And from our standpoint, I don't think we at the Equinox have, at least what the editorial board was speaking on, we haven't really had any qualms with what the marketing department has been doing up until this point. They've been doing very well, I think, with the resources they have to demonstrate the different types of experiences and economic opportunities that, students contribute. And so I think maybe it just kind of muddles the message a little bit more when you're trying to think of it in this way.
Yeah, and I think if you even just go like the Keene.edu webpage, you'll see that they do a pretty good job marketing the different branches that we have here. I don't think it's any program above one another. I think it's just liberal arts title in general that makes us stand out. And I don't think that we should necessarily have these Venn diagrams that are talking about like how many students are here, how many students are here, and say that that makes a major or a program more important than the other ones. I think that's not a really good way to look at it through our kind of viewpoint. But I also think it's just a very quick decision to make after such a large cut of our staff last semester. And it's just another change that feels unnecessary and feels that it's just going to negatively affect everything.
Right. And ultimately now we are in 2026, so we're back in a regular election year. So, midterms coming up in November. Students who live on campus have the right to vote in the state. And so I think a big reason why we hammered on trying to convince the public of the, why they should support higher ed and, in turn support legislators or candidates who support higher ed is because, the voters still hold the power to some degree. There's gerrymandering and, structures that kind of make it harder. But, raising the prominence of that issue, I think, is going to be the big test, and trying to make people think more about that when they vote will be a big part of that. So I think that's the main, disagreement here is talking about strategy, talking about audience. And so that was what we hammered in on with the editorial. But yeah, I encourage, you as the viewer to, check these pieces out, because there's a lot of very interesting stuff that's going on with the college at this point, safe to say. But with that being said, I'd like to move on to the Region State Top story, which comes to us from Kate Dario at NHPR. And this is about something that also happened over break, but is also kind of, this article in particular is more of a recent development. Merrimack leaders, so Merrimack, New Hampshire, sent a letter that basically said they aren't in support of a proposed or, an allegedly proposed ice holding facility in the town, which would be, I believe, where the now shuttered Anheuser-Busch or Budweiser facilities were in the town. And so there was plans that were released, I believe, in the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, one of those two, where they detailed a map that shows proposed or areas that the Department of Homeland Security was looking at in terms of we want facilities here, 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 here. And so the Merrimack facility was meant to be one of the main ones for New England, where they could hold migrant detainees. And so that drew a lot of criticism. I think even leaders such as Republican Governor Kelly Ayotte sort of didn't really condemn the news of this, but also kind of questioned it because there wasn't any communication at this point from the federal officials that this was even in the works or even somewhat planned. So I think a lot of the local criticism to this comes from the fact that there wasn't really that much communication beforehand. It was kind of them just looking at, here's like a potential area and we think that'd be good because of XYZ reasons, but not communicating that. But obviously this also all ties into all of the news that's happened recently with, what ICE is doing in terms of their migrant operations. And Minneapolis in particular has been the main recent one. I know ICE recently also came to Maine, or they were about to. And so there's been killings at the hands of ICE officers. There's been lots of news about sort of unjust treatment, racial profiling, not using legal warrants, instead using administrative warrants from DHS. Lots of court cases, and the list goes on. If you've been keeping up at all with the news, basically you've probably heard all this anyway. But a lot of reasons why there's been local pushback to this is, I guess, what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and I think that the people should definitely have the most power here. If the locals are telling you they don't want this here and they're pushing back against it, and I think that the government and the officials should listen to them. I think they should have say over what goes into their county and into their town. And we touched upon this in the news section as well with what's happening with ICE, but there were 32 people killed in ICE custody last year. It's very fair for people to be uneasy about the idea of that moving into their space. And we've seen it happen with Renee Good and all the protests going on, that they are a danger to the greater community. And people should be scared of what's going to happen if they come here. There is a chance that people will be shot, even if you're not doing anything wrong, even if you have legal papers on you, even if you're just protesting. It's just a danger to everyone.
Yeah. And one of the things that's talked about in this article is some quotes from the police chief about they're treating the vacant warehouse where the allegedly proposed facility was planned for. We're treating it as a vacant warehouse, meaning that they're not making any preparations on their side. And then there's also a quote here that talks about how they got correspondence from DHS that there hasn't been any official confirmation that the facility is coming. But obviously with things like this, when the media gets a hold of information and releases it maybe earlier than officials would want to, then you either deny or delay basically your reaction to, if this is accurate or not. So there's not really a lot of, certainty with, the plans for this at this stage. I know that there was also an opinion piece in the opinion section about, I think, this very article. So I encourage everyone to check that out as well. But with that being said, we can move on in back to the student life section now and talk about some more upbeat stuff. So another thing that happened over break is the American Institute of Architecture students took a trip to Denver for the chapter's national organization forum. So lots of workshops and sort of professional networking opportunities for those in the architecture program. And it seems just like a really cool opportunity. This occurred from January 6th to January 11th. So they, over break, like I said, a lot does happen behind the scenes. And so with things like this, I'm glad to hear that students are sort of taking advantage of, having this free time to sort of pursue something that will help them professionally, not just academically also, but, everything that we do here kind of is meant to piggyback into the professional world. And so a lot of good stuff, a lot of good quotes from club officers that talked about their experience. And so, representing also, Keene State at the national level is always great. I know we do that quite a bit at conferences and stuff, so it's good to, at a time like this where it's like you don't know, where things are at with the college, or the uncertainty with all that. That it's good that other places know about Little Keene State and the corner of the country in the far northeast.
Yeah, I definitely agree. During my freshman year, I was close with an architecture major who was a senior at the time, and they all work very incredibly hard. It is a difficult major, and I think this was just a very great opportunity for them to seek other things out in their field, to find future career opportunities, and I think it was just a great thing for them to be able to go to.
Right. Yeah. And all the way to Denver too, all high up there. So that's a nice little change of scenery, change of elevation also. So happy for them and glad we got some good news here. And continuing on with that theme, in the arts and entertainment section, this is actually an article from me, which is about 4 new hires in the music department. So if you don't know or don't remember from before winter break, there was some uncertainty in the department because, as a result of the separation incentive packages and planned leaves already beforehand, mainly former chair of the music department, coordinator of keyboard studies, Christina Wright Ivanova, left to become chair of the performing arts department at a university in the United Arab Emirates. And then separately, voice faculty Dan Carberg left for New Zealand at the same time, who he also took the separation incentive package just out of convenience. And so at the time, new chair coming in for the department, obviously, losing two, pretty big faculty in two big areas, piano and voice. There was kind of, not a lot of, we didn't really know what was going on. I know we initially had reached out to possibly do an article at that time, but I think even they weren't completely certain about, what was the future was going to hold in terms of being able to bring in new folks. But fortunately, over break, in a series of Facebook posts, the music department announced one hire after another, basically. So there's 4 new hires in total, and this is Brittany Redler in the voice category, which is basically essentially the replacement for Carberg. So she'll be covering the sections that he would have normally covered. And then Sarah Ames, who's teaching an adaptive music course, who's also a Keene State alumni and local to the area. And Jin Yang Park, who's previously filled in for Christina Wright Ivanova when she was on maternal leave. And so she will be a piano adjunct helping with all Steinway activities. So stuff to do with, that program. And then Keen Southard, who's a collaborative pianist. And so he'll be helping out with student performers. And so it seems like they've basically built things back up from the ground here in some ways, and brought in these 4 new folks, 3 of which are local to the area, so that always helps. And I talked to the music department chair, interim music department chair, Heather Gilligan, and she was very confident that the student experience would not be affected at all. All of the course sections are covered. All of the, assistance that students need with performances are going to be covered. And I think it's just really important to not only just have this piece of good news, but then also just for, think about how many ties the Redfern has to the community, how many events that they host that people go out and see, and how many things would potentially have been affected if they were not able to bring these folks on and help out with student performers. The Redfern, I think, is one of the biggest bridges that the college has with the community. So I think thinking of it in that way, too, is nice. So just all around good stuff.
Yeah, and after the large loss of staff that we saw last semester, I think it's just really happy to have 4 new hires. I think it's definitely the good news that the college needs right now. And it makes me happy to see the music department recovering after that very hard blow they were suffering from in the winter. But we have seen it across campus where other programs are still suffering from it and the loss that they've had. I know one of my friends, they lost their professor for their class because they took the leave of absence, and they had to completely restructure the class to a different area of studies, and it's a completely different class now than what it was previously going to be. So, while I'm really happy for the music department, I'm really hoping in the future that we can see this happening further and have new hires and just kind of recover what we lost.
Yeah, it is important to note also that it's not, you know, all across campus. It's not as if everything's been built back up. It's definitely true. I think there's still a lot of things to look at and be concerned about from other departments as well, and sort of how these sections are going to be filled, how majors will continue to be offered or maybe not. And so I think communication will remain key on that, and just making sure that people know. I think fortunately, the good thing about this is, the music department was very upfront, I think, with students, internally with their communications, also with the public about, where they were at along with the process, and, getting these people in the door as reasonably and as quickly as possible, I think helped a lot. And even though they're all, adjunct folks, they still seem very dedicated to the community, and sort of just, hearing from two of them at least that I spoke with. They seem very passionate and looking forward to helping students. So I think, good, and, still just, being mindful of other areas of campus too. But ending off here is our top article in sports. And so this is a game recap of the women's ice hockey team beating New England College 3-1 at home. And they moved to 7 wins, 10 losses on the season. So they haven't had the, biggest breakout season yet or anything like that, but they have been playing, a little bit over break. They've been practicing, and so kind of going back again to just, all these things that do happen while, you might not think of them if you're not a student athlete. Students are working really hard to sort of, make sure they're maintaining their game and, physical activity and things like that. And so it's nice to see, their first game back, I think, of the academic year and being able to win that. This article also comes to us from our staffer, Frank. And so I was glad to see him continuing with the good reporting on that and some good photos from Skylar as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's always great to end off with sports after some of the heavier topics to get into ice hockey and the different sports teams and seeing how they're really improving, how hard they're working, and just giving them the credit they deserve after everything they put into these sports. It's definitely a nice change of pace, and I'm glad for them, and I'm glad to see that they're putting in the effort needed for everything.
Definitely. With that, I was also going to just briefly mention that tomorrow, Friday, January 30th, the Equinox is going to be in the Student Center for the Winter Celebration event hosted by student involvement. So this is the biggest sort of get-together of student organizations of the spring semester, and we'll be out there giving out shirts and stickers and talking about what we do. So I encourage everyone to come show up if you can. I believe it's 11 to 2, and so I'm looking forward to seeing everyone and telling everyone about the opportunities we have. We recently elected a new copy editor, which I'm really excited about. Our administrative executive editor, Tim, unfortunately, has finally left us for Germany. And so he's abroad now, but we also elected our former sports editor now, administrative executive editor, Jacob. And so we have still opportunities abound. If you're interested in just coming on as a staffer and seeing how you like it, I encourage you to. I'm always going to try to leave a plug in when I can, because obviously we care a lot about what we do and could always use the help. But yeah, with that, I would like to take a moment to extend some thanks to the composer of the music for Noxcast, our very own Equinox alum, Zach Keenan, the creator of the graphic for Noxcast, our very own art director, Elijah Fisher, and the editor of Noxcast, our very own multimedia director, Noelle Hisgen. Until next time, thanks for tuning in.